In an age when words could shape wars, sway elections, and mold public opinion, one man dared to believe that journalism could also uphold truth. Henry Jarvis Raymond was not born into power or privilege, yet his voice would go on to shape one of the most influential newspapers in the world. A restless mind with a stutter in his childhood, Raymond grew into a relentless reformer, navigating the stormy waters of 19th century politics and media. His vision, clear, principled, and unflinching, set the foundation for the New York Times, a publication that would outlive empires and revolutions. This is the story of Henry J. Raymond, the man, the mission, and the enduring legacy he left behind. Raymond's silent struggles. Henry Jarvis Raymond was born on January 24, 1820, on a modest farm near Lima, New York. The eldest child of Jarvis Raymond and Lavinia Brockway, he entered the world without wealth or privilege, but with a mind that would soon set him apart. By the age of 3, Henry was already reading. By 5, he was telling stories. Yet, behind this early brilliance was a hidden struggle. From a young age, Henry battled a relentless stutter, a speech impediment that isolated him from his peers and made even simple conversations a source of dread. In school, though his mind raced with ideas, his voice often betrayed him. Teachers overlooked him. Classmates mocked him. The boy who could devour books with ease was often silenced by fear and shame when called upon to speak. This emotional exclusion cut deep. Henry learned early what it meant to be invisible, to be misunderstood. Every sentence he tried to speak felt like a war with his own body. So, instead of playing with toys like other children, he turned inward, into the world of ideas, of printed words, and most of all, of news. While others played games in the fields, Henry was listening, reading, absorbing everything he could from newspapers and pamphlets. News gathering fascinated him. Stories of politics, progress, and the pulse of the outside world stirred something in him. His stutter may have silenced his voice, but it sharpened his hunger to be heard. In the quiet corners of his childhood, he was already shaping a vision, a dream of telling the truth clearly, boldly, and without interruption. Outgrowing the stutter. Unlike many who manage stuttering through therapy or lifelong techniques, Raymond experienced something far more rare. His condition faded naturally with time. According to medical research, around 75% of children who stutter eventually outgrow it before the age of 10. This phenomenon is linked to neurological development, particularly in the brain's left hemisphere. Areas like Broca's region, which play a crucial role in speech production, undergo significant maturation as they grow. As the brain's neural pathways strengthen, the struggle for fluency often eases. In Raymond's case, this natural progression seemed to follow that very path. By the time he reached his preteen age, his speech had improved dramatically. He no longer feared speaking, no longer braced himself for mockery or interruption. And with that shift, his confidence grew. In fact, the transformation was so complete that many people who met Henry J. Raymond later in life never even knew he had once struggled to speak. The boy who had once trembled at the sound of his own voice became a man who would shape public discourse for generations to come. For Raymond, the silence of his early years gave way to a voice that would one day help build a media empire. With his voice under control and his mind as sharp as ever, Raymond turned to a new passion, journalism, and a dream he'd nurtured since his youth. Early aspirations with George Jones. As early as 1843, Henry Jarvis Raymond and his close friend George Jones shared a bold vision, one that stood in sharp contrast to the media landscape of their time. In an era when newspapers were often little more than weapons of partisan warfare, Raymond and Jones dreamed of something different, a publication grounded in facts, not fury. They wanted to inform, not inflame, to enlighten, not enrage. Their idea was radical for its time. While most papers shouted party lines and traded in political outrage, Raymond and Jones imagined a paper that would stand above the noise, offering accuracy, integrity, and balance. It was a noble ambition, but like so many young visionaries, they faced one unavoidable obstacle: money. Without capital, their dream remained just that, a dream. For nearly a decade, the idea remained in the shadows, held back by empty pockets and the harsh economics of print journalism. But Raymond was not a man to surrender to circumstance. He sharpened his skills, built his reputation, and waited for the right moment. And finally, on September 18, 1851, the wait ended. The first issue of the New York Daily Times rolled off the presses. What began as a quiet act of defiance against the chaos of partisan journalism would grow into one of the most respected newspapers in the world. The Times didn't scream headlines, it earned trust. And that first issue was the spark. Their vision was no longer just a conversation between two friends. It was now ink on paper, and it was only the beginning. Yet, creating a newspaper was one thing. Keeping it alive in the volatile world of 1850s, American journalism was another entirely. The struggles behind the Times. Launching the New York Times was anything but easy. In fact, it was a near impossible endeavor. Henry Jarvis Raymond and George Jones were driven by a powerful vision, but the reality of starting a major newspaper in the midst of fierce competition and constant financial strain was a relentless challenge. From the start, securing adequate funding was a daily battle. Money was tight, and early editions of the New York Daily Times, as it was initially called, were produced with scarce resources. The newsroom was a place of constant scrimping, where every dollar counted, and every decision was weighed against the threat of running out of funds. But financial instability wasn't the only hurdle. Raymond's political ambitions often diverted his attention away from the paper. His desire to shape the nation's political landscape sometimes took priority over the business side of journalism, slowing critical decisions. His tendency to delay action frustrated his partners and staff, leading to growing tensions within the newsroom. Meanwhile, competition loomed large, particularly from Horace Greeley's New York Tribune, which already commanded a massive readership and was well established as a political powerhouse. For a time, it seemed Raymond's dithering and divided focus might doom the paper, but they were determined. Realizing that they couldn't sustain the paper on their own, Raymond and Jones turned to their network of friends. Through these connections, they managed to raise $100,000, a sizable sum for the time. This financial boost provided the stability and resources the paper desperately needed to run more efficiently and focus on growth. It was a turning point for the New York Daily Times. With renewed financial backing and a sharper focus, Raymond and his team could finally begin to build the paper into the powerhouse it would eventually become. Against all odds, the paper had survived its hardest days, and now it was ready to thrive. The rise of Times. With funding finally secured and political distractions momentarily set aside, Henry Jarvis Raymond turned his full attention back to the paper that had once teetered on the edge of collapse. Now recommitted, he infused the New York Daily Times with renewed purpose and a bold identity rooted in restraint, integrity, and intellectual depth. In an era dominated by sensational headlines and partisan rants, Raymond steered his paper in the opposite direction. He refused to chase outrage or scandal for the sake of sales. Instead, he cultivated a publication that appealed to readers who craved facts over fury, thoughtful citizens, business leaders, and policymakers who valued clarity over chaos. Raymond didn't just write articles. He built a brand. He fiercely promoted the paper, expanding its reach issue by issue, speech by speech, subscription by subscription. And in doing so, the boy who once struggled to speak found his voice not in conversation, but in print. His words now shaped public discourse, influenced debate, and helped define the journalistic standards of a growing nation. By the early 1850s, the paper had evolved. The Daily was dropped from its name, and the New York Times officially emerged. The name change marked more than a rebranding. It signaled a rise in status. The paper was no longer an underdog. It was becoming a force in American media. Under Raymond's leadership, the Times distinguished itself in the noisy, combative world of 19th century journalism. Raymond had done more than revive a struggling paper. He had established a legacy, one of reason, responsibility, and a belief that journalism, at its best, could inform rather than inflame. And the world was starting to take notice. But just as the paper gained footing, Raymond's political ambitions took center stage again, pitting him directly against his former mentor. Political ascent and partisan conflict. Henry Raymond's election as Lieutenant Governor of New York in 1854 was a personal triumph, but it triggered political chaos. To secure the nomination, Raymond had to edge out Horace Greeley, a major figure in journalism and politics. That decision wasn't just a routine political move. It caused deep fractures among influential allies. By accepting the nomination over Greeley, Raymond alienated key figures in his own political circle, including Greeley himself, powerful party boss Thurlow Weed, and Senator William H. Seward. These were not minor allies. They were central to the leadership of the Whig Party. The betrayal cut deep, and the relationships never fully recovered. The consequences were immediate and damaging. Internal tensions within the Whig Party, already simmering, boiled over. What had been a dominant political force began to collapse under the weight of infighting. So while Raymond's ascent marked the peak of his political career, it also played a role in tearing apart the fragile coalition that had sustained the Whigs for decades. Still, Raymond remained a formidable force in national politics. In 1856, he authored the first official platform of the newly formed Republican Party, a document that outlined its core beliefs and defined its identity. Raymond's political instincts were sharp, and his influence only grew. During President Abraham Lincoln's re-election campaign in 1864, Raymond played a vital role behind the scenes. He rallied support, crafted messaging, and helped secure Lincoln's victory in one of the most consequential elections in American history. But not all of Raymond's political choices earned praise. After being elected to Congress, he faced growing criticism for his moderate stance during the post-war period. While radical Republicans pushed for aggressive Reconstruction policies in the South, Raymond was seen as too cautious, too unwilling to challenge President Andrew Johnson's lenient approach. His refusal to support radical Reconstruction alienated many within his own party. As public sentiment shifted, so did his standing. In the end, Raymond lost his bid for renomination, a sharp fall for a man who had once helped build the very foundation of the Republican Party. Disillusioned with politics, Raymond returned to where he had always found clarity: his newspaper. Building a legacy, from Tweed to Titanic. Under Henry Jarvis Raymond's leadership, and even more so after his death, the New York Times began to embody the very ideals he had set in motion: journalistic integrity, rigor, and a steadfast commitment to the truth. In 1871, the Times took on one of the most powerful and corrupt figures in New York politics, William Boss Tweed. At a time when many newspapers bowed to political pressure or accepted bribes, the Times refused to be silenced. Despite threats and intimidation, the paper published detailed exposés of Tweed's embezzlement and fraud. These investigations not only informed the public, but also led to Tweed's arrest and the collapse of his political machine. It was a defining moment, proof that the Times would hold power to account, no matter the cost. Decades later, under publisher Adolph Ochs, the paper evolved even further. He introduced the enduring motto, "All the news that's fit to print." These words weren't just branding, they were a mission. Ochs transformed the paper into a national institution, expanding its reach with Sunday editions, international reporting, and in-depth features. He prioritized accuracy, clarity, and seriousness, guiding principles that would come to define American journalism itself. When disaster struck, the Times was there. After the Titanic sank in 1912, the paper ran continuous updates, dispatches from survivors, and transatlantic cables, setting the standard for how the media should cover tragedy. And during both world wars, the Times didn't retreat from danger. Its correspondents reported from the front lines, often at great personal risk, so that readers could understand the stakes and scope of global conflict. Through wars, scandals, and upheaval, the New York Times emerged as more than just a newspaper. It became a public trust, one committed to facts over fear, substance over spectacle. The legacy Raymond began with ink and integrity continued to shape journalism for generations to come. But greatness also brings scrutiny, and the Times faced its share of controversy in the modern era. Trials, triumphs, and a digital future. In the 21st century, the New York Times confronted some of the most daunting crises in its long and storied history. Once regarded as the gold standard of journalism, the paper found its credibility shaken by two major scandals that tested its editorial integrity and the public's trust. The first was the controversial coverage leading up to the Iraq War. Relying on faulty intelligence and unvetted sources, the Times published stories suggesting that Saddam Hussein possessed weapons of mass destruction. These reports were later proven false, and the paper faced widespread criticism for amplifying misinformation that helped justify a war. In response, the Times issued a rare and deeply scrutinized editor's note, acknowledging its missteps. It was a humbling moment that underscored the consequences of lapses in journalistic judgment. Shortly afterward came the Jason Blair scandal, a painful chapter in the newsroom's history. Blair, a young reporter, had fabricated or plagiarized dozens of stories. His actions, and the management failures that enabled them, triggered a national conversation about editorial oversight, diversity, and accountability. Top editors resigned, and the paper faced a reckoning from within. And yet, from these crises, the New York Times emerged stronger. Guided by publisher A.G. Sulzberger in the digital era, the paper began to reinvent itself, not just as a traditional newsroom, but as a dynamic, multi-platform media brand. It invested heavily in investigative journalism, interactive storytelling, and digital innovation. Sulzberger championed a subscription-first model, and readers responded. By 2025, the Times boasted nearly 11 million digital subscribers, a figure once thought impossible for a legacy newspaper. Beyond news, the brand expanded strategically. New York Times cooking became a household staple for culinary inspiration. The New York Times games, including the wildly popular Wordle, fostered daily engagement. And with the acquisition of The Athletic, the paper signaled its commitment to owning premium sports journalism. Today, the New York Times is more than a newspaper. It's a global institution, delivering fact-based reporting across formats and continents. Resilient, adaptive, and always evolving, it remains tethered to the principles Henry Jarvis Raymond once stammered to express: truth, integrity, and public service. From a stuttering farm boy in rural New York to the founder of one of the world's most influential newspapers, Henry Jarvis Raymond's journey was nothing short of extraordinary. Though his voice once faltered, his vision never did. He believed in journalism that informed rather than inflamed, a legacy that still pulses through the New York Times today. What do you think about the New York Times? Share your opinions in the comments below. Thank you for watching. See you in the next video.